Hello everybody, Dr. Patel here. Sorry about the delay getting started today. I was having a little bit of technical difficulties, but I hope you can hear and see me. If you can't hear me or if you can't see me, then please comment and let me know. Today we are talking about osteoarthritis of the shoulder. So last week and in the past, we've talked about arthritis conditions and how it could affect the low back, how arthritis can affect joints like the knees, but really any joint can get osteoarthritis, and it's very common for us to get osteoarthritis, and quite frankly, it's very common to have osteoarthritis and have no pain associated with it. So today, for those of you that haven't watched my prior videos, I want to go over what osteoarthritis is. Specifically, I want to talk about arthritis of the shoulder, how it occurs, the different shoulder joints and how they're involved, as well as what we can do to slow down the progress or prevent it from getting worse. Now, if you have any questions, feel free to comment. If you want to talk about your specific condition, whether it's your shoulder or any other joint, please feel free to comment, DM, or email us at info@fxregencenter.com. Without further ado, the shoulder. I just posted a video on shoulder anatomy, but I'm going to go over a little bit of the anatomy itself and talk about how osteoarthritis happens. So this is a shoulder joint. I'm going to zoom into myself a little bit so you can see me. So this is the shoulder, and this is a right shoulder with the collarbone in the front and the shoulder blade in the back. The shoulder blade actually comes to a tip called the acromion, and the collarbone, called the clavicle, comes and meets it at the first joint of the shoulder called the acromioclavicular joint. This is the second largest joint in the shoulder. There's actually multiple joints in the shoulder, but this joint is the one that develops osteoarthritis the quickest, the most common joint to develop osteoarthritis in the shoulder as we get older. And this is a joint between the collarbone and the tip of the shoulder. So really, with any motion that we do with our arm, there's constant kind of rubbing or friction or pressure that takes place there. So it's not uncommon for us to gradually start getting some wear and tear of that joint over time. Wear and tear, you may have heard that term before. So what is that? And what is osteoarthritis, right? Osteoarthritis really is just wear and tear of a joint. It is the common and normal degenerative process as we are getting older. So the smooth surface of a joint called the cartilage starts to gradually wear away, and then the bone gets a little bit rougher. In itself, arthritis does not equal pain, and it is, as I mentioned, very, very common for us to have arthritis in this joint and have zero pain associated with it. Now, underneath the AC joint is the main shoulder joint here, and that's the glenohumeral joint, or the joint between the glenoid part of the shoulder blade and the humerus, which is the ball of the ball and socket. And this is the main joint of the shoulder, that is where the arm bone comes and meets the shoulder blade. And this is like a golf ball sitting on a tee. And I'm going to draw that out for you in a second here. But there's a few other things that we have. We have this thing called the rotator cuff, which is essentially 4 different tendons that come from muscles that start on the shoulder blade. And these tendons wrap around this golf ball and provide stability to the ball and socket joint. So how is it that we develop arthritis of that main ball and socket joint? Well, I'm going to go through some of those details now. And the way I'm going to start with this is really by mentioning that, going back to what I said about that looking like a golf ball sitting on a tee. So if you can kind of see this illustration here, I'm going to show you here that this is essentially the ball of the humerus. This is the arm bone, the humerus itself, and here's that socket over here. So basically this is the golf ball sitting on the tee. So what does that look like? If you think about a golf ball sitting on a tee, that golf ball does not have a lot of surface area. So I'm going to draw out what that looks like. If you think of a golf ball, oh boy, here we go. Right? Sitting on a tee, there's not a lot of surface area on that tee, right? That's why the golf ball is so unstable. That's why it's easy for us to hit that golf ball with a golf club and have it fly X amount of yards, right? So that's pretty unstable. So we have two major things that cause stability to the golf ball. We have this soft tissue structure called the labrum, which is essentially a ring of tissue that surrounds the tee, deepens the tee, and provides more stability to that golf ball. It almost provides a little bit of suction to a certain extent, and that helps with providing stability overall, and that's called the labrum. Okay. In addition to that, we have the rotator cuff that wraps around the golf ball here. And that's 4 different muscles that wrap around the golf ball and basically form this cuff that surrounds it, and that helps with keeping stability to the golf ball overall. When these muscle fibers fire, that's what actually helps with rotating the golf ball in different directions, and that's why it's called a rotator cuff. But what happens as we get older? Well, over time, when we're using our arms throughout our lives, that golf ball is constantly moving. For anybody that has done any kind of overhead sports, that it's very common for us to get some stretching of this labrum. This labrum, similar to ligament structures, and if you heard any of my lectures previously, the ligaments are like those thick rubber bands that surround broccoli in the grocery store. And the labrum, to a certain extent being similar to that, can get stretched, right? That rubber band can get stretched if this ball is moving. If that rubber band gets stretched, right? If this is overall stretched a little bit wider, or if you get these kind of degenerative tears that occur inside the labrum, then you can imagine this golf ball is going to start to get a little bit more motion in it. As that golf ball becomes a little bit more unstable, the smooth surface of the ball, which is called the cartilage, right? The smooth surface that surrounds the ball where it interfaces with the socket, that cartilage is going to start to gradually wear away. So over time, you're going to start to get little kind of cracks in the cartilage, right? Little fissures, little areas of potholes, or little areas where the smooth surface is getting a little bit rougher. Over time, then, the bone underneath the cartilage is going to start to get rougher as well. So as that ball is starting to move more, as there's friction that's taking place, that bone is going to start to get a little rougher. Furthermore, as time proceeds, then that bone is kind of reacting then to the excess motion that it has there, and the bone may actually start to bulk up in certain areas because the bone's like, hey, there's a lot of friction. I need to actually provide stability because the labrum and the ligaments and everything are not doing their job efficiently. So the bone will actually start to bulk up in order to try to provide more stability to the golf ball on the tee. And that is called a bone spur. Eventually, over time, if there continues to be abnormal friction or motion in the ball and socket joint, eventually over time the bone actually starts to get bruised. It starts to get areas where the bone itself is bruised or internally bleeding. The bone itself starts to become less healthy, and eventually over time the bone actually starts to die back. Now, that is the end stage of osteoarthritis, right? When the bone actually starts to break down and die, crumble, that's the end stage of osteoarthritis. But really, osteoarthritis is a spectrum. And that spectrum starts with basically the looseness of the joint, or the ball starting to get a little bit less, getting a little bit more mobile on the socket. Eventually, the bone starts to lose its cartilage, and then the bone starts to bulk up a little bit, and then the bone starts to break down. I don't know what those drawings are supposed to mean, so don't worry about that. But ultimately, what we got to understand is that osteoarthritis is a spectrum. Now, what's interesting about this spectrum, just like any other joint, with the exception of when the bone is actually breaking down, when the bone is actually dying, with the exception of that end stage, osteoarthritis does not actually equal pain. It is common for a joint that has arthritis to become painful, but it does not have to be. So what is it that causes the joint to become painful? Well, there's a few different things that could be involved with why a joint with osteoarthritis becomes painful. Now, if we're starting to develop osteoarthritis over time, if at that point we do something to aggravate the joint, we're lifting something funky, we fall, we injure ourselves, we're moving our arm in a fashion that is not meant to be moved, right? Then it's easy for the joint to get irritated or injured. And I've talked about this with osteoarthritis in general, whether it's in the low back or the knee, but the same is applicable for the shoulder. When a joint injury occurs, inflammation occurs as the first part of the healing process. But that inflammation should come and then it should go. When a joint has osteoarthritis, it's more difficult for the internal environment of the joint to actually regulate the process of inflammation. The cells that live inside of a joint that has osteoarthritis are not working as efficiently as the cells of a joint that does not have osteoarthritis. So when an injury occurs, it's harder for that joint to then react appropriately to that injury. And it's common for inflammation to then settle in and stick around instead of going away as it should. Now, when that occurs, that just progressively makes the situation worse. And the longer that inflammation sticks around, the more we can cause the arthritis to actually worsen. So what does it look like to have shoulder arthritis, and what what do we worry about? What do we not worry about, right? So when we look at arthritis here, here's a nice diagram of what the different stages of arthritis kind of look like here. When you see this, the early arthritis is when you're starting to get little wear and tear of the cartilage. The cartilage starts to wear off more, and then bony changes start to occur. As those bony changes progress, the shape of the bone actually worsens. So here's an example of the bony changes that can start to occur with a shoulder. So this is the ball and socket. This is an X-ray, and you can see the round bone here, but you can see that it's becoming a little bit less round over here, and you're actually starting to see little almost holes that are forming inside the bone, which are called cysts. In the spectrum of things, this is still not considered severe osteoarthritis. But as arthritis worsens, there's more changes that can take place with the bone, such as this. Now you can see that the bone is starting to change shape. The round structure of the bone is starting to actually get more jagged and start to flatten, and you can see that there's actually kind of big changes to the round structure that is taking place over time. So when the arthritis becomes substantially worse, well, that's a circumstance where we're no longer talking about a round peg in a round hole, but we're talking about a situation where we have a square peg in a round hole, and therefore the range of motion or the ability of the round ball to rotate in its socket starts to change. When we're at those extreme cases of a square, peg in a round hole, well, that's the circumstances where something like a shoulder replacement surgery may actually be of benefit, because there's nothing that we can do to actually change the shape of the bone without doing something like surgery. How do we prevent it from getting to that point? Well, that's the thing that we need to pay attention to when we're starting to get some shoulder pain. Shoulder pain is the type of thing that can come from multiple sources, and a lot of times it could be other areas, not the joint itself. It could be something like the rotator cuff. And when we identify that there's things that are going on inside the shoulder, it's important to not only address the pain that's associated with it, but ultimately it's important to get the shoulder joint to move more appropriately. Because as I mentioned, the earlier stages of osteoarthritis do not necessarily equal pain. If we can get the body moving correctly, if we can get that ball and socket moving correctly, then we can slow down the progress of the osteoarthritis. And that's the thing that we need to focus on. When we have earlier occurrences of pain, when you have stuff that's going on, we need to pay attention to it. So if you have pain, you reached funny and you have some pain that's occurred, it might not be the end of the world. You have pain for a couple weeks. That's not something that I need you to be concerned about. Because the normal inflammation that takes place as we get older, or with an injury, is something that could take place over the course of a couple weeks. If the pain is lingering, we're talking about things that are lingering for a month, 2 months, etc. Or if this is something that you get pain and it goes away, but then it comes back a month later, or it comes back a few months later. These are the things that we need to be aware of. These are the red flags or the check engine light coming on in your car that you need to pay attention to, because these are signs that something is going on there. At the very least, these are signs that something is not going on mechanically appropriately. It might not be severe arthritis. It might not be something more concerning, but it might be a sign that something is going on, and we want to slow the progress down so that we don't end up dealing with a situation where the osteoarthritis has progressively worsened. So that's kind of the spectrum of what happens, how osteoarthritis takes place in the shoulder joint, what we can do to slow down the progress. If we have issues, we just need to be wary of that and try to address these things before they start to get worse. The good news is there's a lot of things that could be done to improve shoulder pains. ranging from things like physical therapy to certain injection procedures. When we're specifically dealing with osteoarthritis, I don't typically recommend cortisone injections because that can make the arthritis worse. But injections ranging from prolotherapy, sugar water injections, to hyaluronic acid gel injections, to blood PRP, to bone marrow and adipose tissue, various different things can help with various different types of and severities of conditions when it comes to the shoulder. So a lot of different options, but quite frankly, when it's mild and when we want to get ahead of it, it's the appropriate exercise, nutrition, getting the body moving and acting correctly that's the mainstay treatment. So I hope all that made sense. If you have any questions about the shoulder anatomy, as we've discussed it, there's a little bit of a video on anatomy that we posted on our Facebook and Instagram pages. I'm going to shift from some low back that we were doing previously into the shoulder for the next couple of weeks. Stay tuned. I'm going to talk about the rotator cuff and what is it, what happens when you have bursitis and tendon tears and things along those lines. But I'm also going to do something that I haven't done yet before. On Facebook Live, I'll do some in-person live physical examination, diagnostic ultrasound, so you can see what I do to really evaluate what's going on inside the shoulder, what are the different components, what are the different pieces of the puzzle, and what that looks like under ultrasound, right? What is that visualization of what the rotator cuff, the joint, looks like on a live model. So stay tuned. If you have any questions about the shoulder or any other joint, or if you have any other topics that you want me to discuss, please hit us up. Again, you can comment, you can DM, you can email us at info@fxregencenter.com. This has been Dr. Patel. Hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like, share, and let everybody know that we're here for you. And next week I'm actually going to be out, but the following week we're going to pick back up with the shoulder. You guys have a great weekend, and see you next time.